Okay, we are in John chapter 4, week number 2. Last week we looked at John chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, under the idea that the whole chapter has kind of a main topic, a main idea, a big chapter heading, if you will. And the chapter heading is about Jesus going to the outsider, Jesus going to the outcast, Jesus going to the other. And we talked about how sometimes we are the outsider, the outcast, and the other, and yet we often treat other people like the outsider, the outcast, and the other. So this chapter is just layered with meaning for us. And so last week we talked about that, Jesus intentionally going to the outcast. This morning what we're going to look at is the interaction between the woman, the Samaritan woman at the well, and Jesus. And it's just the first little interaction, because the very first little interaction, you have kind of this unexpected meeting with God. The Samaritan woman was just going to the well to get her water, and pow, ran into Jesus. And so we can definitely look and take a lot from that into our lives. A God encounter. And whether we're distracted by just the daily demands of going to get water, or are we looking to meet the Savior? So let's read this passage. Let's do all 10 verses, so verses 7 through 10 are in context. So let's look at John chapter 4, verses 1 through 10. This is what it says. The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. That is the wrong scripture passage for some reason. We're all over the place there. Whoops. I will read it from my Bible. Here you go. Ready? John chapter 4, verses 1 through 10 says this. Oh, they're working on it. When therefore the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judah and departed again into Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. And he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. Last week's. Now, new stuff, 7 through 10. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman therefore said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, would ask me for a drink since I'm a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Good question, right? Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God, and it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So you have this little exchange. Oh, look at that. All right, it popped up finally. So let me give you the sermon in the sentence. The sermon in the sentence, to wrap this idea up, is that the Samaritan was distracted by the small stuff of life. She went there just to get water. And missed what God was really trying to do. John chapter 4, verses 7 through 10. Haven't we all had Samaritan woman experiences where we're distracted by the small stuff, right? It's huge. When I read this paragraph, I immediately think about the God encounter. The idea of just going about your day and meeting the divine. And Jesus isn't walking around Smith's now trying to buy distilled water for his for his machine at home or something. So you may think that there's not a chance for you to go to Central Perk and run into Jesus. But this isn't a unique moment. This isn't. The Samaritan woman bumping into Jesus isn't a new idea. In fact, bumping into the divine could be the title of the Bible. There's so many examples. And one of the things I take away from having an unexpected encounter with God, you know you've had an unexpected encounter with God when it has long-term, long-lasting results and evidence. You don't just arbitrarily bump into God in the checkout aisle and walk away having just had a nice conversation. When you bump into God, God radically changes your world. Often, in itself, unexpected ways. So I had a hard time. I wanted to give us some examples of God encounters that had long-term impact so that we could relate those to the Samaritan woman at the well with Jesus. And so I went to Abraham. Abraham and his 3 visitors. You know this story from Genesis chapter 18. Abraham and Sarah, they're hanging out, and they see 3 men coming toward them. And because of the laws of hospitality, they had to treat these visitors with grade A, 5-star hospitality. And so they start getting out all the food and all the drinks, and they're going to show these 3 visitors a wonderful time. And you've read Genesis 18. You know that it starts off as 3 men who come in to the camp of Abraham and Sarah. And all of a sudden, these 3 men change. Because one of the men talking to Abraham, all of a sudden takes on a new identifier. He's no longer called one of the 3 guys. He is called Yahweh, the Lord God. So you got 3 men coming up. They're showing hospitality to these 3 men. And one of them gets in a side conversation with Abraham and reveals to Abraham he is God. The Bible theology people call this a Christophany. Good luck spelling that. It starts with Christ. And then Christophany. It's not an F, it's a PH. Don't get me started. Christophany, where you have an appearance of Jesus in the flesh in the Old Testament before he is born. So that of these 3 men, one of them is Jesus. And Jesus is talking to Abraham and talks about how a year from now, Sarah is going to have a child. And Sarah laughs. And that causes the baby to be named Giggles. Right? Isaac. Isaac means laughter. So I hope he wasn't funny looking. That would be kind of mean, right? You have your first comedian, Isaac. Imagine that, a Jewish comedian. In this dialogue between these 3 and Abraham and Sarah, the 2 go away. They're going down to Sodom. And the Lord stays with Abram, and they start talking about the wickedness of Sodom. And they talk about judgment and God's wrath. That is not good dinner time discussion, but at least it's taking place over the dessert. And so they get into a discussion about, are there any righteous people in Sodom? Will you really wipe out an entire community just because there's not 50 righteous people? How about if there's 40? And Abraham and the Lord God, this Christophany, Jesus in flesh in the Old Testament, gets into this negotiation. And Abraham's good. He gets God down to 10. And it turns out they can't even find 10, right? You know how this goes. And in verse 18, in chapter 19 of Genesis, the two angels that have gone down to Sodom, they are described as angels. So you have three men. One of them is Jesus. The other two go away, men. And then they're described as angels. And you know what happens. And Abraham and Sarah's life are forever changed by this. Primarily because of senior citizen pregnancy. And Isaac being born. Finally, the heir has arrived. A generational impact from this encounter with God. That immediately takes me to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Hebrews chapter 13 in the New Testament has a lot in chapter 13. But this verse talks about, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, says that we ought to show hospitality to strangers. Because people who have shown hospitality to strangers have entertained angels. A reference back to Abraham and these three people. How awesome is that? Grade A, 5-star kind of hospitality. And then I jump to 1 Peter, because Peter talks about that. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, the Apostle Peter commands us, you and I, believers in Jesus Christ, to be very hospitable. Where we ought to take care of visitors in our home. We ought to do that. We ought to be engaged. So here you have Abraham and the three visitors from Genesis chapter 18. An encounter with God that transformed this family and for generations. Very much like the Samaritan woman and Jesus. I stayed in Genesis because I jumped to the grandson, Abraham and Sarah's grandson. And I went to Jacob, Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32. Jacob is heading home, and Jacob is afraid of his brother Esau because he has wronged Esau. And he's worried that Esau is going to, make him sleep with the fishes. And so he's sending gifts to Esau to kind of placate him. He sends his wife and children across the river by themselves so that maybe Esau will have mercy on the women and children. And so Jacob is by himself on one side of the river. And he's camping, and a man shows up, and they get into a wrestling match. So Jacob is a wrestler. And so they wrestle all night long until dawn arrives. And when the dawn comes up, it's like, listen, I got to go. And Jacob asks this man's name, and he won't tell him. And in the process of this wrestling, Jacob is injured in his hip. Who can identify with being injured in the hip, right? And so what happens is, it's declared that Jacob has wrestled with God. And he walks with a limp after this. And he names this place Peniel, which is not a type of noodle. Peniel means the face of God. Jacob got to see the face of God. He walks away with a limp. He ends up being at peace with Esau, and it all works out. So you may be asking, how is Jacob forever changed after this wrestling match of Genesis 32, other than he has that hip injury and now he limps? God, in wrestling, did not reveal his name to Jacob, but changed Jacob's name. He gave Jacob a new name, and it's a new name you all know. Israel. Where does the name Israel come from? It's the name God gave Jacob in this wrestling match. Why? Because Israel means 4 pins and you win. No, that's not what it is. No. Israel in Hebrew means he who wrestles. So Jacob is the first Hulk Hogan. WWE, Raw, you're getting it on, except this is real wrestling, not fake. Sorry if you didn't know wrestling was fake. I totally, spoiler alert. So Jacob was forever changed. He had a limp and he had a new name from God. Now let's jump to Exodus. Exodus chapter 3, Moses and the bush that did not burn. Right? Moses spends 40 years as an Egyptian prince, commits murder. The corpse of his victim is discovered. Pharaoh sends the guards after him because he's a murderer. So Moses flees Egypt and goes into the wilderness. He spends the next 40 years as a shepherd. He's 80 years old and he still shows up for work tending the flock. And while tending the flock, he sees a weird flame on the mountain. And he leaves the flock to go investigate the fire. And he comes upon a bush that is on fire but not burning. And a voice from the bush tells him he's on holy ground. He needs to take off his sandals. He has this interaction with God. He's in a dialogue with God. A burning bush on the mountaintop. And at 80 years old, his entire life changes from that moment on. Because he goes from a prince of Egypt for 40 years, a shepherd in the wilderness for 40 years, and God calls him to be a deliverer of the people Israel and to lead the people out of Egypt into the promised land. And like a good spiritual leader, he didn't want to. He got arguing with the bush. I didn't apply for this job. I don't want it. Here are the 5 reasons, God, why you picked the wrong guy. Thank you for the offer. I'm not interested. I'm very comfortable where I'm at. Here's the 5 reasons why, oops, you've made a mistake, God. For the record, that never works out. And God kind of deals with Moses. Okay, well, all right, you stutter. You have a speech impediment. You're uncomfortable speaking in front of people. Well, your brother, he's mouthy. We'll make him your mouthpiece. So God kind of negotiates with him. So Moses spends the next 40 years as the deliverer of Israel. He has a moment. He's at work. He sees something. He leaves work to go investigate, and his life is changed. He spends the next 40 years in a job he doesn't want. And God blesses him and blesses Israel in the process. Much like the Samaritan woman at the well. And a God encounter. A God encounter. I know, we've been in the Old Testament. You're like, great. New Testament stuff? Okay. The God encounter that we love, that we all know by heart. Acts of the Apostles, chapter 9. Acts chapter 9. Bible trivia. If you know what's going on in Acts chapter 9, congratulations. This is traveling Saul. Saul is on fire for his Jewish God, and he sees these Christians as blasphemous. They are a cancer in his midst. He has persecuted the Christian church in Jerusalem so well that they've been scattered and they're gone. It is Saul that gathered up the coats of the people so they wouldn't sweat too much when they were throwing rocks to kill Stephen, a deacon. That's Saul. He was so good at persecuting the church in Jerusalem, he ran out of Christians. So he went to the Sanhedrin and he said, can I get some papers that will allow me to go to Damascus and wipe the Christians out there too? And they're like, all right, here you go. So Saul goes, he's traveling from Jerusalem to Damascus to wipe out the Christians there. He's on fire for his God, righteous vengeance. We're going to wipe out these heretics. And you know what happens. There's a bright light. He falls off his horse. A voice speaks to him from heaven. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And it's Jesus talking to him. So Saul has this encounter with Jesus on the road to persecute Christians. It blinds him so that his traveling companions have to lead him into the city. Saul's life is radically changed and will never, ever be the same. We don't actually call him Saul. Like Jacob getting his name changed by God to Israel, Saul uses his Greek name. Saul is his Hebrew name. He uses his Greek name, Paul, the Apostle Paul, who will go on and share the gospel with more people than anybody else of his generation. Souls will be saved. Lives will be changed. He's a missionary. He's a church planter. He's an apostle. He wrote most of the New Testament. That Paul never recovered from an encounter with God on the road. Awesome stuff, right? So, the Samaritan woman is just going about her business. Abraham and Sarah receiving company like they're supposed to. Jacob hanging out on the bank of the river, hoping his brother cools down. You've got Moses at work, see something weird. That's it, right? You've got Saul on mission to serve his God. And bam! They have a God encounter that radically changes their lives. If you had asked them the day before such an encounter, what do you think tomorrow holds? Their answer would be wrong. Because we can't anticipate a God encounter. And when a God encounter happens, woo! All bets are off. Because you have interacted with the divine. And the divine is busy. The divine is doing something. And the divine is busy and going to do something with you. And it happens. It happened in the Old Testament. It happens in the New Testament. It has happened all throughout human history. It has happened to you and me, hopefully. You've got that testimony as well of a God encounter that transformed your entire existence. What's the application of this God encounter stuff? Have you had an encounter with God? You're sitting in a room full of people who have had encounters with God. I have had an encounter with God that radically transformed my life. You've had an encounter with God, but not everybody in here has had an encounter with God. And so it's a moment to stop and reflect. To ask yourself if you've ever done it. See, you could be on fire for God like Saul and be wrong because you haven't had an encounter with God that radically changed you. It's something you got to ask yourself. And then pray, asking God to meet you where you're at and radically upset your life, which is always for a good. Always for a good. May God bless you with a God encounter if you haven't had one yet. All right, I don't want to get us lost. When looking at John chapter 4, verses 7 through 10, we've got this Samaritan woman who's distracted by the small stuff of life. And Jesus calls her on it. If you only knew who you were talking to. So she really missed what God was really trying to do. It reminds me of Jesus and Nicodemus in John chapter 3, where Nicodemus comes to Jesus and is talking to Jesus, and Jesus is talking over his head. Nicodemus is talking football, and Jesus is talking your eternal soul. And they're not on the same topic. Nicodemus asks questions. And Jesus is like, okay, you be quiet, let me have a little monologue. And Jesus goes off and just drops divine truth on Nicodemus. And with Jesus and the Samaritan woman, he's just as blunt, but he's a little more careful with her. But she has the same problem. She's not only distracted by the small stuff of life. Listen, I'm here just to get water. Can you help me out with that? Why would you ask me for a drink? Don't you know the social protocols is that you're not supposed to talk to me? You're not only not supposed to talk to me, you're not supposed to even acknowledge I exist, much less ask me for something. Big obstacles. And just like Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman reminds me that we are often distracted by the physical and miss the spiritual. We are so consumed with the physical that we completely miss spiritual stuff. We're so obsessed with the cute commercials of the Super Bowl that we don't watch the game. Or vice versa, because I really watch the game for the commercials. My kind of football involves a soccer ball, so, except for the Green Bay Packers, let's just be clear. God's team. Starts with a G, right? Yeah. So the woman at the well was too focused on the normal and really missed everything. And we can do that as well. Our entire physical existence. I mean, from being born until dying, the whole physical reality around us. Everything here, everybody talking to us, all of our entertainment, our jobs, our career, our education, our friends, every breath we take is physical. All of the indoctrination we get is about physical. Study hard, get good grades, marry the right person, get the right job, earn enough money, buy stuff, save for retirement, take care of your health, your physical body, eat right, exercise, don't do anything self-destructive. Live your life well. Enjoy the grandchildren. The reward for not killing your own children. Enjoy the great-grandchildren of the blessings of long life. And then when you die, leave an inheritance behind you. All of our existence focuses in 100% on that. We get it nonstop. We're brainwashed into thinking the physical is what matters. We spend more money on makeup than Bible studies. We spend more time in front of that mirror getting all the white stubble, making sure the stash, the hair's going in all the same direction. They've got creams now that you can rub in a mustache that have like an odor. If you want like a manly odor, you get sandalwood and bacon. You rub sandalwood and bacon right here, and you're hungry all day for no reason. You just don't know what's going on. You keep finding yourself. Yeah, buffets. I don't know why I'm here, but we do it. Come on. We tease men. We tease the women. But the billion-dollar industry on man's hair products, face creams, taking care of all of this. Can we be honest with each other? Nobody's looking. Right? Yeah, right? We are inundated with physical. The physical is what is important. The physical exercise is what's important. Your physical health is what's important. Physical, material things. So that our entire world is consumed with 100% of that noise and drive. We've been brainwashed. And in no way am I saying, please don't misquote me, I am not saying the physical is not important. The physical is important. It's just not that important. Yes, you should exercise. Yes, you should eat right. You should try to do healthy things. Please get a job. Yes. Please take care of your spouse and your children and your grandchildren and leave a financial legacy. Yes. But it doesn't even make the top 10, and we treat it like it's number 1. That's what I'm talking about. It's important, but it's not the primary thing. It's not even secondary. It's down there. So what happens is you can end up spending your entire life focused in on 11th on the list and ignore the top 10 completely. I got to spend a lot of time thinking why we do that. And I think it boils down to how easily we are distracted. We are busy and distracted. Our calendars are full so that we don't even have time. We're running around from one thing to another, and we're exhausted at the end of it. We can't take a break. Now, you identify with that mostly about work, but you do it with family as well. And so you're running children and relatives from one appointment and one engagement to another. So that I remember having 4 teenagers. Yes, I survived 3 teenage daughters and a teenage son. They're all 3.5 years in a time span, 4 kids in 3.5 years. Yeah, sorry about that. And I remember, basketball on Monday, soccer on Tuesday, Wednesday night was Awanas or some kind of church thing. Thursday was this, and Friday was that, and then Saturday was all the other stuff. And you spend all that time running them to activities, thinking you're keeping them out of trouble, when all you're doing is teaching them that it's better to be busy and distracted. And then they grew up to be adults that are running around all directions, and they don't have time to stop when they see somebody on the side of the road with a flat tire. They're so busy going from A to B, they don't see the car on the side of the road. They're so busy going A to B that they're drinking and eating their lunch on the drive while answering emails. I've driven all over this country, and I have seen cities and communities that have great drivers. And I have seen cities and communities who have horrible drivers. And I'm convinced Utah's the worst. I don't know what's going on. It's like I half expect to see somebody driving backwards down the freeway. Just, okay, there you go, I've had more near-death experiences in my car in Utah than I have 20 years in Alaska. I think I know the reason, because Alaska will kill you if you drive like that, just by the nature of the environment. You don't live long enough to cause accidents. You die in the first one because it's so bad. We're so busy and distracted. Our calendars are full. At work, at home, and in our lives. And I get it. I know. I get it. I'm busy too. I'm distracted too. It makes us feel important. Look how important and productive I am. I'm booked solid for the month of August. I'm getting some stuff done. I get it. It feeds our ego. I get it. If you're busy, then you don't have a moment to think and to acknowledge the horrible pain that you're in because of the loss that you have experienced, or the pain you have received because you're a victim. If I just stay busy enough, I won't have to deal with that. I get it. It's part of the human condition. And yet we never have the time then to be still and know that the Lord is God. We don't have time for devotionals. If we're a super Christian, we'll listen to K-Love in the car and count that. Maybe Bible on tape, so while we're running red lights and causing accidents, we can be listening to somebody in the background and count that. Instead of taking time to be quiet, read Scripture, meditate on it, and have a moment between you and God in silence and stillness like it's a first date, where you give them your full attention and soak their presence in. That's what Scripture calls for. Those kind of personal moments with God lead to spiritual growth. No wonder we're surrounded by spiritual babies. We're too distracted to grow in the Lord. I also get it that we're Americans, and because we're Americans, we want to earn what we've got. Right? We want to earn what we've got. We pull ourselves up by the boots. If you got a struggle, you just work harder to overcome that struggle. That's our mindset. That's our motto. We are, as a nation, overachievers because we want to work. It's what built this nation. It's what keeps our economy going. And so even though you're being paid for an 8-hour workday, you put in 15 hours. Because you're an overachiever. Because you think it's all about work. Because effort is important. Because your parents did that. And that's all you know. And what a horrible thing if you see your coworkers more than you see your spouse. If you see your coworkers more than you see your spouse, you need a career change. Because the divorce will cost you everything. I get it though. The whole culture is wired toward that. And yes, work is important. But being an overachiever does nothing but lead to burnout. And when we apply that to our spiritual lives, we've got the same problem. Because we're overachievers and we want to work. And so then we think effort impresses God. Effort does not impress God. God gives us, and we receive it. You can't earn more of God's attention. You can't earn a louder voice in God's ear. You can't earn answered prayer requests. You can't earn any of that stuff. But we're bent that way. We want to. We think if we work harder, then we will receive more of the spiritual treasures. And we are wrong. So we take that burnout culture of American corporate society and we apply it to Jesus, and it just doesn't work. Jesus cut it to the heart when talking about treasure in the heart. Treasure in the heart. Because it boils down to this. What we're passionate about reveals our God. Write that down. What you're passionate about reveals who your God is. That's why I know deep in my heart that the American culture may be the greatest idolatry culture in the history of the world. We don't have temples and statues. You don't go burn incense or sacrifice an animal, but we are a culture of idolatry because we are passionate about the stupid stuff. We are passionate about the Green Bay Packers always defeating the Vikings. We are passionate about whatever. You're a Ford guy and the Chevy guys are just morons. We are passionate about being pro-veteran. We are passionate about our political party. We are passionate about nonsense. And what you are passionate about reveals who your idols are. Be passionate about Jesus, which is a spiritual work all into itself, because everything around us wants us to be passionate about something else. And that's the snare of the evil one. Let's look at 3 Bible passages. Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. Jesus said, "But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal." When we are passionate about things of our culture, we are passionate about garbage. It will rust, it will mold, and it will be lost to us. Have you ever gone to an estate sale? Have you ever gone to a garage sale or a yard sale? When you go to an estate sale, a garage sale, or a yard sale, you're not buying an estate, a yard, or a garage. That's where people try to sell things to you at a discounted price that they've bought and no longer want. Right? I mean, that's what it is. And what surprises me is how much stuff ends up being sold to strangers. Because at one point, you valued it. You paid top dollar for it, and now you're selling it for 1/10 of its cost. And that reminds me about treasure and what we are passionate about. Because we may be passionate about something at the moment, but in the end, we're going to sell it for 10 cents on the dollar. It's going to go away. And that assumes we can keep it, that rust, moths, or thieves don't take it. So instead, let's be passionate about what is truly valuable. Let's be passionate for the things that will be stored in heaven. Let's be passionate about sharing our faith with the lost so that souls are saved. Let's be passionate about our own discipleship so that the Holy Spirit will make us a more mature believer. Let's be passionate about being absorbed and consumed by Jesus and His Word, memorizing it, meditating on it, doing Bible studies, doing readings. Let's be involved in missions and discipleship and teaching and service and loving God and loving others, storing up treasure in heaven that transcends all the garbage down here. The Samaritan woman didn't get it. Nicodemus didn't get it. They were too focused in on, well, the stuff around. Look at Matthew chapter 19. Jesus said, Matthew 6:20, treasure in heaven. Now look at Matthew 19. Matthew 19, verses 21 through 22. Ouch. Not a lot of sermons done on this one. Matthew 19, verses 21 through 22 says this. Jesus said to him, "If you wish to be complete, perfect, go and sell your possessions. Give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Come, follow me." Imagine the response to such a powerful exclamation from Jesus. Next verse has the response. "But when the young man heard this statement, he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property." Right? You know that discussion. He asks Jesus about eternal life. And Jesus mentions the commandments. And the guy's like, "I obey all the commandments. I'm a good, obedient follower of God." And then Jesus comes in and goes, "Yeah, but your idol is golden. Your idol is greed. Your idol is about your bank account and your possessions." So he does some idol busting right here. All right, if you want to be perfect and complete, sell all that garbage. Follow me. Can you imagine any statement by Jesus that is counter-American culture? You want to be perfect? Sell everything. Follow Jesus. we have our eyes blinded by the propaganda around us and the demands on the physical. And we just miss the spiritual. We are Nicodemus. We are the Samaritan woman. But when you have an encounter with God, it changes everything. Let me give you one more example of Elisha. Elijah, and then Elisha. Elisha. Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 17. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 17. Elisha is part of northern Israel. And northern Israel is at war with Aram. And every time they have a war council in Aram, Elisha is told what is said in the war council by God, and Elisha tells that secret spy information to the king, and they counter the war plans. So much so that it's frustrating the enemy king, and so they go after Elisha. So they send an army to get the prophet, because the prophet knows what is being spoken in secret. And so Elisha is chilling. He's asleep. And his servant wakes him up. Wake up! We are surrounded by an army. And Elisha's like, how many cups of coffee have you had? Let there be calm and peace. And so Elisha and this servant are looking at these chariots. They're surrounded by the special forces. And Elisha is calm. And the servant is freaking out. Don't you see how outnumbered we are? We're going to be slaughtered. And Elisha says this in prayer. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 17. Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Elisha's servant was focused in on the physical. We are outnumbered, we are outflanked, we are surrounded, we are going to die easily. And Elisha was focused in on the spiritual. And he said, nope, they are in fact outnumbered and outgunned. You should feel sorry for them. And if you haven't read 2 Kings chapter 6, it's hilarious. Because Elisha prays that God would blind the entire army. And so the whole army goes blind. And then Elisha goes up and goes, hey, you're in the wrong place. Let me lead you to where you're supposed to be. And so they literally put hands on shoulders, and Elisha's in front, leading the army that had come to kill him. And where does Elisha lead them? He leads them straight into the military base so that this army is surrounded by their enemy army. They lead them straight into the capital city of Samaria. Hilarious! Now, how's that for military strategy? The servant, we're the servant. We look around us at the obstacles and say, oh no, that is insurmountable. When we need to be Elijah and go, nothing is impossible for my God. We don't know how many tens of thousands of angels surround us. We don't know what kind of victory in Jesus God has planned for us tomorrow. We don't know God's mission for you if you'll simply leave the sheep and go see the fire on the mountainside. We just don't know. We need to slow down. Way down. We're driving 120 in a 15. We need to take a moment and evaluate our lives and how we spend our resources. And then we need to make two commitments. One is to serve God, not the garbage. And then be available for God to work and for God to put us to work for Him. Fourfold. Yes, each one of those could be a sermon unto itself. You're welcome for only doing it in a slide in 3 minutes. Right? Slow down, evaluate your life, serve God, and be available to have an encounter with God and to be used by God. What's the application? Why are you so busy? Why? Have a moment of introspection and examination and answer that question. I am so busy. Why? I'm busy because of these reasons. And then ask yourself, how? How are you available to God for a God encounter and to receive God truth? These are the questions we need to be talking about amongst our families. Spouses need to discuss these two questions. Parents, you need to talk to your children and your grandchildren about these two questions. Ask them how available you are to God and hear what they have to say. Let's not be Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman. Let's not. We're going to have an altar call, a chance for you to respond in public to a God encounter or a conviction. Matthew chapter 10, verse 32 says, "Therefore everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven." That sounds like a public confession to me. And so, if you're in the auditorium during the last song, you can come forward to pray, to talk to me, to join the church, to talk about baptism, whatever. I'm going to be standing over here, available to pray with you, talk to you, whatever. You can come forward if you walk along that wall or down this aisle, and you will not be on camera. If you're watching online, you can have an altar call response by sending an email, by calling the church line, or by an instant message, and we will get back to you, my friend. It's important to respond. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before